Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the Western world's quick march to a dystopia. Now, the people all across the Western world are very angry, upset, disappointed. If they're given the opportunity to vote against whether it be mass migration or the supposed climate change protection policies, these sorts of things, they would, but they're denied that opportunity. So all the major parties are pursuing the same dystopian policies, but no one can explain why. Any attempted explanation is filled with so many lies and so many grotesque untruths that it's clear that the politicians who are sent to sell the message, and these politicians that are sent to sell the message are nothing more than globalist stooge flunkies, by the way. But nonetheless, when or if, which is rare in itself, they try and attempt to sell the message or use the globalist controlled media to do so, they have to rely so heavily on lies and untruths to do it, which means that it can't be real. If it's a real issue that they're trying to address, then lies aren't needed, untruths aren't needed, and fabrications aren't needed. So why are they doing this? Obviously, it's their enthrall and they're under the control of the globalists. Why are they doing it? What's the upside here? What's the benefit? Because Western citizens were the most enfranchised citizens in history, human history. And that's pretty much all been lost. The vote has been neutralized. And if you look at the globalist controlled Democrats in the United States, how viciously and aggressively they're attempting to deny the democratic process to the voters of the United States, for example, by taking out the leading candidate for one of the political parties and using any and every underhanded means to do so, illegal means, inventing things, fabricating things. So let's just have a little look at that. I don't know anyone, I think, who isn't disappointed, angry, upset, and annoyed by the state of the economy, whether it be in Australia or Britain or Canada, the United States, and so on. More and more people are slipping into subsistence existence, and they're already by far and away the majority of Western citizens. Didn't used to be that way, but governments are aggressively pursuing policies that make our lives worse, that make our purchasing power, our paychecks worse, that make our standard of living worse, that interfere with our day-to-day lives, our freedoms, democratic freedoms, freedoms guaranteed under law, only arbitrarily exist now at the whim of the globalist controlled government. So there's a whole lot, but there's no sign, certainly that I can see, there's no sign that any political party in the West, major political party, is prepared to address or reverse or even slow down this decline. It's just more and more of the path, charging down the path to maximum dystopia. There's just more of it than and that's all there is. Now it's dressed up in different, in pleasant sounding clothes. Are we increasing the price of energy so that you can't afford it, so you freeze to death in winter or fry to death in summer? No, we're not doing that. We're saving the planet from climate change. We're saving the planet. So all this pain and suffering, then if we didn't do this, then we'd all be dead from Armageddon, from climate change. So we're saving it. So back to your electricity bill has gone up 500% in 5 years. That's nothing compared to Armageddon. So, but Armageddon, who says Armageddon? There's something way off in the future. 30 years ago they were saying it was Armageddon. 20 years ago it was Armageddon, and so on. So Armageddon's always been threatened here from climate change, whether it's some new ice age or we're all going to cook or something. So it's all gone back and forth. But the reality is that there's no proof of any climate change Armageddon, but the policies are being recklessly pursued, which reduce the standard of living and make a very small number of investors very, very rich. And maybe that's where we should start looking if we want the answers. I never thought it was possible that elected representatives would sell out the population just to make a handful of, already rich people even richer. I just never thought that could happen in a democracy with rule of law. And so even though the signs of it were there years ago, and I mused over it, I thought, no, it can't be right. No, our politicians, our judges, our courts, media would never allow this to happen. They'd be all over it and it would be stopped before it got. But when the globalists very, very, thoroughly took over the body's politic of all the major parties, they took over the media, they infiltrated the courts. They neutralised and removed all the future obstacles they would face or that may come on. So it's only political candidates and so on coming out of left field that no one saw coming. That's the only danger to them now, and they work very hard to neutralise those, such as Donald Trump. But just having a look, they're pursuing courses of action, political, economic policies, social policies that are making our lives much, much worse than they were. And again, I sort of point out and I've done this many times, that the average rent on sort of an average apartment would take up around 20 to 25% of someone's income 50 years ago. So a mortgage would be similar, and I mean, the fancier the house you had, and the more it would take up. But that was the rent back in the day, and if I look at the rent that you pay on a particular apartment 50 years ago, and compare it to the rent for that exact same apartment today, and then compare that to the average wages. So back then, it's 20 to 25% would be taken up. If your wage would be taken up by paying rent. Today, it's 60 to 65%. That's a 3 times increase in rent relative to the average wage. So the average wage needs to be 3 times more than it is in order to get parity, or the rent needs to come down by 60, 65%. So now, how did it get that out of whack over 50 years? Rents were increasing at a much faster rate than wages were. And wages were increasing. Business lobbies have been boohooing into their coffee cups endlessly about how wages are increasing so fast and inflationary pressures and so on. But I don't remember anyone talking about, the financial media and politicians talking about how increasing rents or rents that are increasing so fast are inflationary or so on. Recently there's been interest rate rises in Australia, and there's the only thing that they would talk about was consumer goods. There's too much demand for consumer goods, and wage rises are too even though rents were going up by 15 or 20%, 25% a year in some cases. That never rated a mention for some reason. Why? That's the most inflationary thing going on at the most. Nothing to do with fucking wages. So we've got a very concerted effort all across the Western world. All the headlines are the same. All the rent increases relative to wages more or less the same all across the Western world, give or take 1 or 2 percentage points. So clearly it's centrally controlled. You don't get that much uniformity across different economies, and each economy has different mixtures of some are a lot of manufacturing, some have got a lot of iron ore and minerals, others have got a lot of farming. So there's a lot of differences in the economic structures, but they're all producing close to exactly the same outcome, exactly the same price increases in food, even though some have got that they're 100% independent in that food stuff, but somehow their price rises are the same as an economy where they have zero production of that food. or zero. They've got to import everything somehow, but the price increases for that food stuff are exactly the same in both economies. Clearly, that's controlled. That's got nothing to do with fucking local conditions or circumstances. This is centrally controlled and directed, not just in food, but in so many areas. Rents. If you look at rents in Sydney, for example, within a certain band range of distance from the downtown area, the rents all in a if you go around the whole city in a sort of circular band, the rents in that band are all the same. So the different conditions, some have train stations, some are well serviced by public transport, some are not. Some are in flat, some are in hilly areas, some of this, some of that, some are older buildings, and some are newer. The rents are exactly the fucking same in the band. You don't get that uniformity in market-driven economy, but you do in a centrally planned economy. So what we're looking at, whether it be in the price of energy or the price of rents or mortgages or so on, we don't have a market-driven economy, quite far from it. We've got the centrally planned economy, and it's centrally planned in the same structure, almost to the mathematical decimal point, all across the Western world. Now, this is no small thing when your rents, relative to average wage, when your rents are more than three times more expensive than they were 50 years ago. This means people's standard of living and the way they live is drastically altered. It's much tougher. So people are working, a 40-hour week or working two jobs even, or multiple part-time jobs. They're working just to stay on subsistence level existence. Their lot in life is nothing. There is to exist and just manage to exist day to day. I mean, it's fucking insane. Didn't used to be like that. I remember as a kid, buddies from school, or those sorts of things that there'd be the stay-at-home mum, dad would work, whatever job, and they would have the house, they'd have two cars, they'd have this, they'd have that. The lifestyle that was affordable there, on not far above, or starting not far above, the average wage. Even say school teachers could afford quite a decent existence back in the day. But look, this is, if you look at the key areas of accommodation, food, and energy, these are things you can't do without. And the price rises in the things that you must have in life relative to wages. That's where the price increases, the primary price increases have been. In terms of consumer goods, consumer electronics, for example, motor vehicles have stayed on or about the same relative to wages, but you actually get quite a lot more car now than you did 50 years ago. A lot more extras in it. So air conditioning is standard, those sorts of things. So the increase in the cost of education has been fucking, just intergalactic in its proportions. That's been a big change, particularly given they've tried to sucker so many more kids into doing college or university education. And, there's a very small number of people used to do it when I was a kid or when I graduated to university. So that there's a 3%, 2 or 3% would make it through. Actually meeting someone in the workplace that had a degree was quite rare. You'd come across them, it's quite rare. Meeting someone at a PhD, you may never do it in your lifetime. Yet today, you don't go through a day or two without bumping into an affirmative action PhD. There's so many of them. But coming back to this thing, we've got a centrally controlled, globalist controlled planning bureau, socialist planning bureau in effect, and that's just directing all the Western countries to, this is how much relative to wages, this is how much things it costs. So it's being arithmetically calculated. This is how much people will be required to spend on rent. This is how much on food. This is how much on energy. It's being predetermined and then inflicted on the populace, so that this is forcing us to have a very different view of life, and a very different view. But came back to the point a moment ago, the essentials of life are what's costing a lot. The consumer goods, optional discretionary consumer goods, they're quite well priced. The value of them relative to wages has stayed the same or has improved. For example, the first personal computer I bought, back in the day was like $6,000, and that was like a major outlay. But today I can buy something many times more powerful than that, but relative to wages, it's probably come down in price by something like 90% relative to wages. So that's the difference that have occurred in many categories actually of consumer goods, not all, but many. But the essentials of life of where the costs have been inflicted on us. Now, you can say, well, the reason for the increased costs are governments adding more taxes. That is an issue, by the way. But the government's adding more taxes on things. The mass migration. We're just taking refugees from war-torn parts of the planet. What's wrong with that? They have a right to a better life. What about their rights? You say your rights are to have affordable rent, but what about their rights, you fucking Nazi? So these people have been inflicted on us so that we can't have access to medical care, we don't have access to jobs or well-paying jobs, or all things like that. So the mass migration has crowded out part of the rental and housing market. That's for sure. But offshore buying, which didn't exist before, offshore buying, rich, whether it be the big black rocks and whatnot of the world, or rich Communist Party generals, who don't have to earn their money through ingenuity, but rather through cronyism. So there's been a massive buying up of Australian real estate and elsewhere, Canada and so on, Britain, by what I call crony buying. These are people that are just well connected from corrupt, tin pot places where they make hundreds of millions of dollars by fleecing the peasants, and they just want places around the world to launder and park that money, have bolt holes that they can escape to if things get rough where they are, that sort of thing. And they're buying swathes of fucking real estate. This is a big issue as well. And there's no attempt by Western governments to stop this or limit it. They pretend to bring out legislation to slow it down and stop it, but they don't. So we need to come to the reality that we're being quick frog marched to a dystopia that's being forced upon us without our agreement, without our consent, even without our knowledge in terms of the details. And the only thing that's happening, other than our own disenfranchising and so on, and our own impoverishment, the only thing that's happening is a very small number of people, one in every 350 people, is being made very rich by this. You could say that, say, one in every 220, sort of around there, is doing all right out of it, but the rest are losing and losing handsomely out of it. So could it be that just a tiny proportion, one in every 300 or so, is getting very rich, and it's them that are driving this? Let's make all those billions of people that fucking poor. There's been some crazy theories that I've seen on the internet, like, for example, the planet's heavily overpopulated. You can say, okay, well, sure, and it's getting worse. There'll be another 500 million Africans just over the next 50 years. There'll be another few hundred million, Indians and all this sort of thing. The areas of the planet that are already insanely overpopulated, which are the main source of illiterate peasant migrants to the West, that things are going to get far, far worse than they currently are. Does that mean, mass migration? I mean, what does it mean? So one of the crackpot theories, well, I don't even know if it's crackpot, one of the insane theories, or seemingly insane theories that I saw, was that the globalists want to bring in a whole lot of Africans and subcontinent people from India and Pakistan, want to bring in a whole lot of those people to the West, peasants from all over the world, westernize them to whatever extent they can be westernized, then there's going to be some almighty virus unleashed, which is going to reduce the population to nothing, and then move all those people back to those places where they can then sort of rebuild their societies along westernized lines. I think that's pretty insane, but maybe it's not, because it's hard to see the purpose of it. Why makes hundreds and billions of people's lives so miserable, forcibly doing it, with maximum levels of deceit and treachery and underhanded? Why would you do that? Who does it benefit? Do you hate these people, that particularly white people? Do you hate them that much that you want to do it? Why would anybody want to do that? Why are all our politicians and judges and other people, police commissioner, why are they all going along with this? I never even thought that was possible, that citizens, white Western citizens, would sell out their own population. I always thought that was the sort of treachery that sinister, evil, tribal, third world corrupt tin pot dictators did. I thought that was all those sort of people did it, but in a democratic rule of law society. So all this is disappearing: the rule of law, the due legal process, standards of living, our enfranchisement, that our vote actually means and can count for something. That the politicians will come to us when they want major, okay, we want to do mass migration, let's take a vote, let's have a referendum. But instead, all these things are denied us. So we're heading to a dystopia. There's no question of that. That we don't need to debate. How quickly it'll happen? Well, it's happening pretty quickly. Just thinking in 50 years, our standard of living has reduced, substantially. Sure, we've got access to much more debt today than we did 50 years ago, and that's the only thing that's bridging the gap to some extent, or to some limited extent. But nonetheless, we're not. The march towards dystopia isn't slowing down. I think it's even picking up speed. There's possibly that a wild card like a Nigel Farage in Britain or a Donald Trump in the United States can stop or slow this down, or at least put it on a different course. But the globalists are doing everything they can to prevent that from happening. So they think it's their right to drive us down this road to a super dystopia. But again, who benefits? It's a tiny number of people are really benefiting from this. If you look at it in world terms, then we're talking maybe 15 million people in the entire planet. They're going to do very nicely, thank you, out of this, and everyone else is going to do rather badly, particularly the people who came from countries that were already quite rich. If you're a peasant from the middle of nowhere in fucking Africa and you go to a first world country, your situation has improved. Relative to purchasing, relative to the money you have, like you've got a job, whereas you just existed as a subsistence peasant in the mud hut. But you didn't build or create or contribute to any of that, and you see it as an entitlement. So it just subdivides overall wealth. When those people that come into the West, just subdivides the wealth rather than creates new wealth. So we all end up at the margins. We all end up poorer as a result of these people being brought in. But again, cui bono, who benefits? You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.